Alright, so the last time I showed you guys anything, I had gotten to a point where I said that I could probably just move forward. But as you saw at the end there, I was getting like 1 or 2 frames per second on my render. So I went back to the drawing board and I'm just going to go ahead and show you the result of that. So I have this slight perspective shifted character that I had made that I thought looked like a minotaur. Doesn't really look like a minotaur, but he looks kind of cool. He's got his foot walking, and I've got a little animation cycle for him that's 4 frames, and he just kind of walks forward and shoots his gun. And I decided to go ahead and throw this guy into the voxelizer, whatever it is, and I just did what I thought might be okay. As you can see, I blocked out certain areas of his body and made them closer. The brighter the color is, the closer it is. Actually, the deeper the voxel stack is. So I only did this top half. I didn't do anything with the bottom part of his body, and so this is the result. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. He looks like a little dog sort of guy, and shortly, like, things like this will be pretty easy to clean up, so I the ability to remove voxels isn't in here right now, and as you can see, I have my lowest color is not 100% black, so I just have the art mirrored in the back on a layer, and he's got the outline there. But if I had the ability to just go in here and click and remove voxels, I could shape this super quick and it'd be basically done. And I'd have a voxel character. I don't know, doing this depth map took me like 4 or 5 minutes maybe. Doing this took me quite a while because I'm not a very good artist, so this took me a couple of hours. Just don't tell anybody. What allowed me to be able to do this is a tutorial that I found that I will put in the description from 2013, and this tutorial goes through every step, how things work, how to do texture mapping, everything that I use to be able to do this. I could even do texture mapping with a 4x4 color. So each of these colors is texture mapped to a bunch of chunks here, and the chunk has a reference to a material that is instanced that just contains all the colors that we would need. I have increased the size of those to a pretty large size just to be able to UV unwrap and re-project the texture onto the simplified mesh. And I'll show you how I do that here in a little bit. The size of it is currently 512 by 512. I need a large texture to be able to unwrap my UV on top of. Like, I can texture map this with a 4x4 texture and do it in Unity. I've got great FPS right now, but you put 5 or 10 of these in there and it gets pretty rough. I was able to successfully decimate one of my models from 19,000 faces, something like that, down to 900. So it's pretty amazing what you can do with Blender. Another thing that I needed to be able to get this to work is dynamic buttons for the palette. So you'll notice they're not spaced out very well right now for some reason, but I do have palette buttons, and we can color any of the faces with any of the colors that we select. And I was having a pretty hard time with figuring out how to generate the buttons, the GUI. So I went from the immediate GUI to a real GUI system that's completely event driven. Clicking here will change you to pixel mode, and we can go back and edit our pixel art, and then we can switch right back to our voxel model. Handles things like the right click. I'm actually rotating around the model. Handles things like the generating and these buttons. And I found a tutorial for how to do this scroll view on this site, another old tutorial from 2015 that I'll put a link in there. But those two things allowed me to get to the point where I'm actually getting a frame rate that's acceptable. I'll go ahead and show you what I do with these models to get them cleaned up. So this is going to be step by step because it was a pain in the ass for me. What I did was I exported my object. That's another thing that I need to show you. Export wavefront OBJ. I would click the object and just export it with this script, and I'll go ahead and show you that. This is the asset that I used, scene OBJ exporter. Super easy. Just import it and it puts this little drop down menu, and then I can bring it over into Blender and import it. Now you want to see what the object looks like in textured mode. You have to click the object to make it active and click texture paint, and that does not look right. So it looks like I get to export that again. One moment. So the full process that I have right now for exporting 128 should be large enough to have my whole model inside of the same chunk. I go ahead and generate it. It takes quite a bit. Now that that's done, lucky for us, our chunk is actually 2 chunks. So what we're going to do is control click and highlight both of our chunks and just go ahead and export both of them. Since we have 2 chunks, we need to apply their position, and we are only going to do the chunks that we selected. I'm going to export them and import them into Blender. And since we had to leave that apply position in there, we're going to have to find our model, and we're just going to move it to the center. We do that by selecting it and then right clicking and click geometry to origin. We made a new collection and put our model in there. We mark that collection original. You don't have to do this, you can just rename your object, but I have this one as the copy, and we're going to decimate the copy. So let's go ahead and show that model and click on it, and we can add a modifier remesh, and as you can see it destroys our model. But all we need to do, from my experience, is bump this up to 6. See, if we bump it down one more, it's going to remove some of our model. We don't want that. So if we bump it down to 6, we'll see that we still have quite a bit of voxels in here, but we're going to take care of that. Also uncheck this remove disconnected pieces if you have pieces that float in the area. The scale doesn't matter, we can just click apply, and the next modifier we're going to add is decimate, and this is the one that's going to do all the work. So go ahead and click planar, and you'll see the model didn't change, but if we go to the wireframe, you can see that we have culled our model down to nothing but all the absolutely necessary faces. We go back to texture paint mode and we look at it. We're not going to have a texture. It's not going to be mapped to the new model. In order to get our texture back, what we're going to want to do is project this texture onto our newly simplified model by baking it. And first, what we have to do with our copy model is to go into UV editing, the correct model, in edit mode to select all the vertices. We actually have to select the mesh, push A to select all of your vertices, push U to unwrap, and do Smart UV Project. An island margin of 0.2 will help, and that's going to separate your islands a little bit, very minimally. And so from that you're going to mark seam, and you're going to have seams from marked basically on every single face. And now we're going to unwrap again, but this time we're just going to unwrap it. And as you can see, it has unwrapped all of our textures. And we have a pretty good idea where everything is. We're going to go ahead and show both of our models. We're going to go to object mode and click on the little camera. I don't even know what this icon is. We're going to switch over to cycles and go to bake. And what we want to do is switch this over to diffuse. And we're just doing the color. Click selected to active. We could change our margin down to 1 pixel. And so the way to do this is click on the original, push shift, click on the new object, and then click bake. And if we're lucky, our ray distance of 0 meters will be good enough, and we will have our texture baked onto our newly simplified mesh. So we're done. It looks pretty good. There are obviously some problems, so we might want to go in and increase our ray length, but let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Looks like we might want to increase our ray length. We've got a couple places over here on the top where it's got the wrong colors, some places on the bottom where it looks like the models aren't exactly the same width, and we've got some problems over here on the side. So we're just going to change this ray distance to 0.5 and try that again. This only works in object mode. It's only going to work if you see this overlapping texture orange display. So there we go. It looks like that helped. In most cases, we've got a little, I think that's our 1 pixel over, so that might be okay. We'll just have to see. Go back to texture paint mode. And that looks pretty good. I think it worked this time. So when you decimate these objects, you do make them slightly smaller. I think increasing that scale size that I showed you earlier that I said didn't matter to the highest value actually matters. So in a real workflow, this is going to work really well. I'm going to be able to make a 2D model, which I can use as a level of detail for farther zoom outs, translate that into a voxel representation, unwrap it in a couple very technically annoying ways, bring it over here into Blender, decimate it, do a little bake action, and have a model that has, let me see, 282 faces as opposed to a model that has 4,168 faces, and a texture map that actually makes sense, that you can tell what's going on, as opposed to this model's texture map, which is the squares laid on the colors. I'm going to work on streamlining it, but as you can see, the voxel program actually has a decent frame rate and is usable, although the editor hasn't been as useful as I had hoped it would be. The editor for the original images. Most of the work I've done is in Sprite, but I imagine adding a few features to this would make it so that I would be more comfortable working in this as a form of cleanup. Making this an automated process where I just click a button inside, making a script for Blender to do this automatically would be amazing, because the process is exactly the same for both of the models that I've done. I just wasn't 100% sure on the specifics of which processes I needed to do. So going through it this time was pretty helpful for me. But go from 2D art, which is great on the ground, I can just stick this on the ground, to turning this into voxel art that goes up in the air, I think is pretty awesome. And although the models that I have been making are pretty triangular, I think that the art style might hold up. So I hope that was helpful. I'll have links in the description for all the resources that I used, and I'll see you when I see you.